The light above my desk hummed softly, the same steady buzz it had made every morning for the last 15 years. Today it sounded different, like a countdown. I stood in my office, glass walls, city skyline, a view I'd earned line by line of code. And for a moment I let the silence breathe. My mug, chipped on the rim, sat next to the monitor, still logged into the system I had built from scratch. On the bookshelf, the photo from our first team retreat leaned slightly askew, the founder's arm around my shoulder. Both of us younger, hungrier, hopeful. It was strange how easily history fit inside a single frame. Outside my office, I could hear the forced laughter of people pretending nothing was happening. Word travels fast in a company that runs on gossip and caffeine. 15 years of loyalty, commitment, late nights and weekends about to be erased by a man who'd been here for 7 weeks. The notification pinged at 9:12 a.m. sharp. "Melissa, please step into the CEO's office for a quick chat," from the executive assistant. Quick chat. That's corporate code for prepare to be replaced. I closed my laptop softly as if not to wake it. I picked up my mug, my notebook, and walked down the hall. The smiles I passed felt like static, empty, buzzing, insincere. When I reached the double glass doors, I could already see him. Daniel Pierce, the new CEO, mid-30s, hair too perfect, shoes too clean. He sat behind the founder's old desk, spinning a pen like he was deciding whether to sign my fate or doodle through it. Char was already there. Course 2 of them. Always 2, like vultures in matching beige. "Melissa," Daniel said with the kind of grin that tried too hard. "Come in, have a seat." I stayed standing. "I prefer to stand." He leaned back. "Suit yourself." He didn't bother with small talk. He was the kind of man who mistook cruelty for efficiency. "We're making some changes," he began, tone rehearsed. "Modernization, optimization, fresh leadership. You've done incredible work here, but the board agrees it's time for new energy. Translation: you're too experienced to manipulate." He gestured toward HR. "You'll receive a generous severance, 3 months' salary, continued healthcare coverage. Security will escort you out once we're done here." He smiled as if expecting gratitude. I didn't give him that. I just said calmly, "Good luck." He blinked, caught off guard by my composure. "Excuse me." I placed my access badge on the table right next to the contract I had printed that morning, just in case. "You'll need this," I said, "to get through the doors I designed." Then I turned, walked out, and let the door whisper shut behind me. The hallway felt longer than usual. My heels echoed against the tile, each step marking the end of an era. Past the server room, the hum of the machines behind the glass felt almost alive. Those servers had been my heartbeat for over a decade. I could still tell when something was off just by the pitch of the fan. No one looked up as I passed. It's easier to avoid guilt that way. When I reached my office, I paused, took one last look around and flipped the light switch. Blick. Soft, familiar sound. The end of one story, the beginning of another. By 10:03 a.m. I was sitting in my car in the parking lot. Rain tapping the windshield. My phone buzzed non-stop. Slack messages, emails, meeting invites I was already locked out of. Powered it off. There's a kind of peace that comes when you know exactly what they've done wrong and that they don't. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small navy blue folder worn at the edges. Inside were notarized papers, old contracts, and one very important clause from 2010. All proprietary software developed under Project Core shall remain intellectual property of the author, Melissa R. Danner, until formal transfer of ownership is executed in writing. The transfer had never been executed because no one ever thought I'd leave. By 10:37 a.m., I was seated in a quiet cafe 2 blocks away, the same one I'd written the first lines of our security architecture in years ago. The barista still remembered my order. Black coffee, 1 sugar. I took the corner seat, the one near the outlet, and opened my laptop. The rain had turned to mist outside, soft against the glass. My inbox was full. Some goodbye messages, some pity. But one stood out from Dave Shaw, founder. Subject: "Wait, what happened?" I smiled faintly. Dave, the man who once called me the spine of the company, typed slowly. Ask your new CEO. Then I closed the laptop and took a long sip of coffee. Across the street, I could see the reflection of the office building where Daniel Pierce was probably giving a victory speech to a room full of yes men. He thought it was over, but it wasn't the end. It was 10:59 a.m. and in 1 minute, the servers would start rejecting every new access request. Not because I sabotaged them, because they no longer recognized anyone but me. At 11 a.m. sharp, my phone, lying face down beside my empty coffee cup, started buzzing so violently it almost tipped over. Then it stopped. Then it started again. 20 calls, then 40. By the time it hit 158 missed calls, I already knew what was happening. When a system as complex as ours goes dark, it doesn't explode. It fractures quietly, invisibly, one access denial at a time. I opened my laptop and navigated to the company's public status page. Partial outage. Core services affected. Course they were. The architecture I'd built wasn't designed to punish anyone. It was designed to protect itself. The licensing core verified ownership signatures every 30 days. That ownership was tied legally and technically to one name, mine. I told them for years we needed to update the assignment clause. I'd even sent reminders. They never replied. Legacy documentation, Daniel had once called it. Well, legacy was talking now. Back at headquarters, chaos was brewing. At 11:03, the customer support portal rejected all logins. At 11:08, the DevOps dashboard showed access revoked. Insufficient permission. By 11:11, 3 government clients couldn't generate compliance reports. Somewhere, an intern probably tried to reboot the system. They always do, but you can't reboot ownership. My phone vibrated again. Unknown number. I ignored it. Then it buzzed once more. Same number and again. Finally, I sighed and answered. Melissa, came the voice. Rough, urgent. Hi, Dave. What the hell is going on? The system's rejecting everyone. Legal screaming. Clients are calling non-stop. Daniel says it's a technical issue. Some sort of permissions bug. I took a slow sip of my coffee. It's not a bug. Then what is it? A clause, I said simply. Silence, then a sharp exhale. Please tell me you're joking. I told you in 2010, I said calmly, that the IP assignment was never executed. Everything under Project Core still falls under my license. You remember that. I thought we fixed it years ago. You thought wrong. He didn't speak for several seconds. I could hear chatter and footsteps behind him, muffled panic, someone yelling in the background. None of the admin keys are working. Finally, he said low and strained. Daniel's losing it. He's in the server room right now, screaming at it. He said something about calling the police. I almost laughed. Tell him to read the contract before he calls 911. At 11:30, the company's Slack channel started leaking screenshots, developers posting error logs, snippets of code, frantic messages like, "Who changed the root key? This signature check is rejecting everyone. Does anyone still have contact with Melissa?" They were trying to reach me, of course, but my company email was deactivated. My personal one wasn't. Checked it. 47 new messages. Most of them desperate. From HR, from legal, from Daniel himself. The last one just said, "Whatever this is, undo it." Now I didn't reply. By noon, things were unraveling publicly. A trade site had already picked up the outage. Tech giant Core Access facing major system disruption. Internal sources cite licensing error. I smiled faintly. They called it an error, not yet a reckoning. I leaned back in my chair, the cafe quiet around me, except for the sound of milk steaming behind the counter. Outside, rain streaked the window like static. The truth was, I hadn't locked them out of spite. The system was just doing exactly what I'd written it to do. Verify the rightful owner. And right now, that wasn't them. At 12:04, Dave called again. His tone was different. Hoarse, defeated. "They're saying you own the software outright," he said. "Is that true?" "Yes. For God's sake, Melissa, why didn't you tell me sooner? I did, I said softly. Multiple times. You just stopped reading my emails after Daniel came in. He went quiet again. Then what are you going to do? Nothing reckless, I said. I'm not deleting a line of code. I'm just waiting for the lawyers to read Clause 9b. What's in Clause 9b? It says that any use of my intellectual property without a valid licensing agreement constitutes breach of contract. Automatic revocation of rights. I heard him swallow hard. That means they're not allowed to run a single process until it's resolved. He cursed under his breath. Melissa, this could sink us. No, Dave, I said quietly. Firing me did that. When the call ended, I opened the old folder again. The one that had lived in my drawer for a decade. Inside I had everything. Contracts, invoices, emails, notarized signatures. Even the timestamp transfer draft they'd never executed. I ran my fingers across the embossed title at the top. Core Access IP Agreement. Initial Development 2010. It still smelled faintly of ink and printer paper. By 12:45, my inbox pinged again from legal@coriac.com. Urgent requesting immediate meeting to resolve IP ownership. Founder involved. Please confirm availability. I didn't respond. Not yet. I closed my laptop, looked out at the street, and whispered to no one in particular. They'll learn that ownership isn't something you can terminate. Then I finished my coffee, stood, and walked toward the door. The cafe bell chimed softly as I left, right as my phone lit up again, this time with a voicemail from Dave. Melissa, the founder, just called from London. He's furious. He just yelled. Who the hell let her own our $600 million software? Call me back, please. I didn't. Instead, I drove home because the next move wasn't theirs. It was mine. By the time I woke the next morning, my phone was a battlefield of missed calls and unread messages. Dave, legal, even Daniel, all of them trying to reach me. I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. At 8:15 a.m., my inbox pinged with a new subject line. Emergency board meeting, mandatory attendance, core access systems. The invitation was forwarded by Dave. Marked URGNT. Part of me wanted to ignore it, make them sweat. But another part, the part that had built that company from a flickering laptop and a second-hand router, wanted to hear what they'd say when they realized the truth. So I brewed my coffee, opened my laptop, and joined the Zoom call. The screen filled with tense faces. Daniel was there, jaw tight, tie crooked, eyes red from what looked like a sleepless night. Dave looked older than I remembered, creased forehead, tired eyes. And on the main screen, calling in from London, was Richard Mullen, the founder. He looked furious enough to combust. The call was already in motion when I joined. We need answers, Richard's voice thundered through my speakers. How does one woman, a terminated employee, have full legal ownership of our entire software infrastructure? Daniel tried to respond, voice shaky but defiant. It's a misunderstanding. We're working on a new agreement. Our lawyers believe we can reassign the IP once we... What? Richard snapped. Once we beg her to give it back. The silence that followed was the kind you could feel in your chest. Then Dave spoke quietly. Melissa's here. All eyes turned toward my little square on the screen. Morning, I said evenly. Daniel's expression hardened. Melissa, whatever game you're playing, it's not a game. I interrupted. It's paperwork, something you should have read before signing termination letters. Richard leaned forward, his tone cooling but sharp. Melissa, I built this company from nothing. You were part of that. We all were. But this situation is untenable. You're claiming ownership over the software that runs every major client contract we have. I'm not claiming anything, I said calmly. I own it. You have the documents in front of you. Clause 12b, Intellectual Property Retention. It was never reassigned. You all operated under implied use. But implied use isn't ownership. Legal counsel, a man named Patel, cleared his throat. She's correct, he said reluctantly. The agreement from 2010 gives her full IP rights until a formal transfer is executed. That never happened. Daniel slammed his palm against the table. That's absurd. She wrote code under company resources. Patel adjusted his glasses. At the time, the company wasn't formally incorporated. She was working as an independent contractor under a deferred salary model. Her contract explicitly stated ownership retention until equity conversion, something that according to the records was never finalized. Richard's glare shifted from me to Daniel. You said all this was handled when you joined. That's what you told the board. Daniel's voice rose. It wasn't my job to review decade-old documents. Actually, I said softly. It was. Dave finally spoke, voice low but steady. She warned us, Richard, more than once. I remember her emails. We just didn't prioritize it. Richard's face darkened. So let me get this straight. We've been selling and deploying software for years. Software that legally belongs to Melissa. And if she wanted to, she could revoke our right to use it immediately. Yes, Patel said grimly. That's exactly right. The room fell into another silence. Daniel's shoulders slumped. So, what do we do now? Richard's tone cut like steel. We fix it. He turned toward me. Melissa, what do you want? I let the question hang there for a beat too long, watching Daniel fidget in his chair. What I want, I began slowly, is acknowledgement. For 15 years I built that platform. Every feature, every security patch, every crisis fix that saved your contracts. I did that. And when you decided to replace me with a man who couldn't tell a server log from a salad menu, you didn't just fire me. You insulted the foundation of your own company. Richard rubbed his temples. You're angry. Understand. But there's a company at stake here. Then you should have treated the people who built it like more than disposable code. Patel interjected. Melissa, if you're open to negotiation, we can discuss a licensing agreement, exclusive with royalties and advisory rights. That would allow operations to resume immediately. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched Daniel's expression, panic, struggling to hide behind arrogance. Melissa, he said suddenly, be reasonable. You can't hold an entire company hostage just because you feel slighted. I smiled faintly. Daniel, this isn't revenge. This is accountability. Dave looked straight into the camera. Melissa, can you give us 24 hours to prepare a proposal? Fine, I said. But after that, I'm not the one who will be negotiating. My attorney will. Richard nodded stiffly. Understood. We'll be in touch. The call ended. I sat back staring at my reflection in the black screen. My heart was steady. Not vengeful, not triumphant, just calm. I'd spent 15 years being the quiet one, the fixer, the invisible architect. They thought firing me was cutting fat. They never realized they'd just amputated the backbone. At 9:47 a.m., a new email arrived from Patel. Melissa, please confirm your lawyer's contact information. We'll begin discussions immediately. I typed back one sentence. He'll call you first. Then I closed the laptop and whispered half to myself. They wanted modernization. I'm just giving it to them. The next morning started without an alarm. I woke naturally. No calendar invites, no Slack notifications, no urgent pings about someone else's mistake. Just silence and the faint hum of rain against my window. It felt strange, almost luxurious to not belong to anyone's schedule. By 8 a.m. my lawyer, Mark Henley, was already in my kitchen. He was one of those lawyers who spoke slowly but thought fast, the kind who always looked like he knew more than he said. A friend had introduced us years ago, back when I was still naive enough to believe loyalty protected you. He sat across from me at the table, glasses perched low on his nose, reviewing the red folder I'd pulled from my bag, the one with the original contract. When he finished reading, he exhaled through his nose and said, Melissa, this is airtight. They don't own a single line of your code. He nodded. I know. He tapped the papers. The question is, what do you want from them? Because once I make the call, You'll have their full attention. Thought for a moment. I don't want revenge, I said finally. I just want respect and terms that make sure they can never do this to anyone again. Mark smiled faintly. Then let's make that expensive for them. At 9:42 a.m. He dialed into the board's conference line. I sat beside him, coffee in hand, listening on speaker. Good morning, he began smoothly. This is Mark Henley, counsel for Melissa Danner. Before we begin, I'd like to confirm that this call is being recorded. A pause, then a flustered voice. Patel, the company's counsel, answered. Yes, that's fine. Good, Mark said. Let's discuss licensing. Daniel's voice broke through, brittle and defensive. This whole thing is absurd. We can't just... Daniel, Mark interrupted, polite but sharp. If you speak, make sure it's useful. That shut him up. Mark continued. Here's what my client proposes. Core Access will enter a 3-year exclusive licensing agreement for the use of her software infrastructure. The licensing fee will be $80 million upfront, plus 10% royalties on all new client deployments using her code. In addition, Ms. Danner will hold an advisory seat to oversee any future architectural modifications. Finally, the company will issue a public statement clarifying that her termination was an internal miscommunication, not performance-related. Silence. Then came a low, incredulous laugh. Richard, the founder, calling from London. 80 million. You can't be serious. Mark didn't blink. If you'd like to rebuild the system from scratch, you're welcome to try. My client's code base covers authentication, infrastructure routing, and API encryption. Without those, your product is just a login screen and a logo. Patel cleared his throat. We'll need time to review these numbers. You have 24 hours, Mark said. After that, Ms. Danner reserves the right to suspend all implied licenses, meaning your company will be in violation of Clause 9b. That could invite litigation from your own clients. Federal, even. Richard cursed softly under his breath. Dave's voice came next, tired but calm. Mark, I think we can work something out. Can you send over a draft? Already did, Mark replied. Check your inbox. I watched through the kitchen window as Mark spoke, rainwater trickling down the glass like quiet punctuation to every word. There was no shouting, no drama, just calm precision. By the time the call ended, they'd agreed to review the proposal immediately. That afternoon I took a walk downtown. The air smelled like wet pavement and diesel. The city still shaking off last night's storm. My phone buzzed again. This time a text from Dave. For what it's worth, you were right about Daniel. He's unraveling. The board's furious. I'm sorry it took this to make us listen. Type back. It's not about being right. It's about being seen. He didn't reply, but a few minutes later, I got another message from an unknown number. You think you've won, but this isn't over. I didn't need to ask who it was. Daniel's ego could be recognized from space. I didn't answer him. I just put my phone away and kept walking. By 6 p.m., Mark called again. They've accepted the core terms, he said. We're finalizing the paperwork in the morning, but there's one condition from your side I'd like to clarify before I send the final draft. Which one? Yes. The clause you added, removal of Daniel Pierce from operational authority. You still want that in? I hesitated for half a second. Yes. Good, Mark said. Because after today's meeting, they probably want it too. That night, I sat on my balcony watching the lights of the city flicker. Somewhere out there in a downtown office full of glass and panic, they were reading every word of the licensing proposal. 15 years of loyalty, erased by arrogance, and now rewritten line by line under my name. Didn't feel like vengeance. Felt like correction. I opened my laptop, reread the draft one last time, and smiled when I reached the last line. All proprietary technology licensed under this agreement shall retain the author's original credit and architectural oversight. I closed the document and whispered, Architect, not legacy, not replaceable. Architect. The next morning began gray and still. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel tense opening my email. I knew what would be waiting there. The final agreement wrapped in legal polish and desperation. At 8:12 a.m., the subject line appeared. Core Access Licensing Agreement. Final draft for execution. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat by the window, and opened the document. Every clause Mark and I had written was there untouched. The $80 million payment, the 10% royalty, the public statement, and right at the end, Clause 14. Effective immediately upon execution, Daniel Pierce will be relieved of all operational authority within Core Access Systems. Below that, my name was printed in black and white. Melissa R. Danner, Proprietor and Chief Architect, Core Infrastructure. For a moment I just stared at it. 15 years of silence and invisibility, reduced to a few typed lines that finally recognized what I'd built. I signed, scanned, and sent it back to Mark. By noon, the agreement was fully executed. The funds hit escrow. Core Access could legally run again. At 12:14, Dave called. "It's done," he said quietly. The board signed everything. Richard approved the transfer from London himself. "Good," I said. Then he added, "They're holding an emergency shareholder meeting in an hour. Daniel's on the chopping block." "I don't need to hear it," I replied. "Maybe not," he said. "But you should know." When Richard saw the public statement draft, he asked who wrote it. I told him you did. I smiled faintly. Then he'll understand it wasn't written in anger. An hour later, the press release went live. Core Access Systems announces strategic partnership with software architect Melissa Danner. Core Access Systems has entered an exclusive 3-year licensing agreement with Redline Technologies, owned and operated by architect Melissa Danner, who originally developed the company's proprietary infrastructure. The termination of Miss Danner's employment last month was due to internal miscommunication, not performance-related reasons. The board expresses its deep appreciation for her contributions and looks forward to her advisory involvement moving forward. The words were diplomatic, clinical, almost sterile, but I could read the truth between the lines. They weren't partnering with me. They were renting back their own foundation. Around 2 p.m., my phone buzzed again. His voice was low. "Ushus. They just asked Daniel to resign." It wasn't pretty. He tried to blame everyone, legal, HR, even me. When Richard confronted him about the missing IP transfer, he started shouting about legacy code and old staff who couldn't evolve. Richard told him to pack his things. Silence hung between us. "Melissa," Dave said softly. "For what it's worth, I'm glad it was you. You deserved better than how we treated you." "Dave," I said, "you don't owe me anything. Just make sure the next person who builds something for you doesn't have to fight this hard to be seen." He exhaled. "Fair enough." That evening, I returned to the building for the first time since the day I was escorted out. Felt surreal walking through the lobby again. Same security desk, same elevator chime, same faint smell of burnt coffee. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Miss Danner, I didn't realize you were." "Just visiting," I said. Upstairs, the floor was eerily quiet. Most people were gone for the day, but a few faces still glanced up as I passed, recognition flashing across their eyes. No hostility, just something like respect. My old office door was still there, nameplate removed, but the space was untouched. Even the small potted fern I'd left behind sat on the shelf, half alive, hanging on, stubborn. I stepped inside, flicked the light switch. Blick. Same sound, same glow. The room looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe because I wasn't afraid of losing it anymore. I ran my hand across the desk, then over the photo that still sat there, the one of me and Dave and the 2 original founders long before the titles and politics. We were smiling. It almost hurt to look at it. Then I noticed something new. A printed memo left on the chair. "Welcome back, Melissa. Your advisory credentials have been activated. Board meeting next week. Coffee's on us." I smiled despite myself. When I left the office, the sun had finally broken through the clouds. The city glimmered in the glass towers around me, rainwater drying on the pavement. For a long time I stood there just watching people hurry past. Interns, analysts, coders, each of them chasing deadlines that used to be mine. Didn't feel like victory. Felt like closure. I wasn't coming back to rebuild. I was coming back to protect. Mark called one last time before I drove home. "Congratulations," he said. "You played it perfectly." I laughed softly. I didn't play anything. I just followed the rules they ignored. He chuckled. "That's usually how the best wins happen." As I got into my car, I glanced up one last time at the building. Behind those glass walls, they were probably rebooting systems, restarting servers, checking logs. And somewhere on every startup screen, a small credit line appeared. One they'd never bothered to notice before. Infrastructure design by M.R. Danner. I didn't need revenge. I didn't even need gratitude. All I wanted was for them to remember who built what they stood on. I turned the key, the engine humming to life. And as I drove away, I whispered the same words I'd said the day Daniel fired me. Words that had turned out to be prophecy. Good luck.